All right, thanks for joining me once again, where Michael's been wrong on the interwebs again, so we'll deal with it again. Off you go, Michael.
Hey, it's Mike here, and today a woman has recently had a stroke on her carnivore diet.
Well, that's the end of the carnivore diet then, Michael. Obviously, if one woman who has been on the carnivore diet reportedly for some period of time, which we still haven't got to, and they had a stroke, well, that's just it then, isn't it? Because no one that's been on a vegan diet for any period of time has ever had a stroke, have they not, Michael? We could be done with your video right now because that's about the level of evidence for anything that Michael's going to present here. Anyway, let's let him have an attempt at it so we can all laugh uproariously. Off you go, Michael.
But has doubled down and continued to follow her carnivore diet because of the science.
That's right.
Yes, the YouTuber 50 Plus Beauty, aka Beth, a couple weeks ago had a stroke and had some doubts, thinking, oh, her high-fat diet and her carnivore diet might have caused this.
Okay, so the woman has had a scare medically. She's had a surprising outcome to her for some reason. Of course, she's going to be second-guessing herself and feeling a bit shaky. If she's not, someone with, for example, my level of training in something like cardiovascular pathophysiology. So there's no surprises here in anything that she's going to say.
The question is the high-fat carnivore diet dangerous or is it safe?
But then she watches a presentation and listens to more carnivore docs, low-carb people, and changes her mind.
I started out researching the whole area of diet and strokes on YouTube.
And this is another case where somebody thinks they're doing all of their own research, but they're really just doing online chutes and ladders into these low-carb information traps where these low-carb doctors feed them misinformation.
Okay, so all of that's an opinion, Michael. None of that's underpinned by science. None of that's evidentiary in any way, shape or form. We can just exclude that. Objection, Your Honour. Speculation.
He's a carnivore just like I am.
Information that would lead her to say something like this about LDL or bad cholesterol.
Okay, number one, Michael, LDL is not cholesterol. Number two, there is no such thing as good and bad cholesterol. There's only cholesterol. It's a molecule which is identical in its isoform in the human body. What are you talking about? You don't know, obviously. This is why you shouldn't be talking about this publicly. You're looking well, by the way, son. Very, very well indeed.
Low-carb diets, high-fat diets do increase LDL cholesterol, but he believes that is actually a very good thing.
So it's a very good thing that we are going to respond. Let's go.
Yes, let's go, Michael. I hope you're going to do a lot better than you've done so far, because so far it's the usual rubbish. It's just your opinion, Michael. Your ignorant opinion, your anti-scientific opinion, your theologically based opinion.
Let's start with some simple background information on Beth in particular. What has her diet been recently? Here she is.
Actually, I've been on the carnivore kind of off and on, but mostly on for about the past 6 to 7, 8 months.
Right, are we done for this video then? Thanks for joining me. Next time we'll talk about something else that Michael got wrong as well. All right, so the kind of disease process leading to the kind of stroke that Michael tells us this woman had, without providing any evidence that she did, by the way, but we'll get to that, takes decades to develop. So how can something that this woman has been doing for the last 6 to 7 months off and on be the cause of it? All right, we're finished. But Michael still isn't for some reason.
But before that, I was on the keto diet, and I really did a very high-fat version of keto.
Then a couple weeks ago, at the age of 65, Beth had a stroke doing some light weightlifting.
And actually, it worked out very well. I got to the hospital quickly. They were able to give me a clot-busting drug, but I am doing very well. In my opinion, it doesn't even feel like I ever had a stroke.
And it is great that the stroke was mild enough that she was able to respond like that, and that she had access to modern medicine that was able to mitigate it, like clot bust it. However, we do have to remember here that strokes are, of course, very serious. They kill like 140,000 people in the US each year and are a leading cause of long-term disability. So dodge that bullet.
Yes, absolutely. If you can avoid having a stroke, you should. Something has been developing in this woman's body over decades and decades, which has led to an atherosclerotic burden to some degree. It sounds like, again, we're just led to take Michael's word for it, that she's had a thrombotic stroke rather than a hemorrhagic stroke. We don't know. I haven't seen the medical reports, whatever. Let's say it was thrombotic. Okay, well, decades and decades and decades in the development there. She's been carnivore for 6 to 7 months on and off, and your video, therefore, with its title, Woman Has a Stroke on the Carnivore Diet, is pretty irresponsible, isn't it? It's just theological nonsense. It's just propaganda, smoke and mirrors. Are we done? He still isn't. There's still minutes of this left. More than 20 of them.
And she is talking about a clot. So in this case, she had an ischemic stroke, which is a blood clot that
If you say so, Michael. Again, we don't know that.
blocks blood flow in your brain, and that's the vast majority of strokes are that type. And her initial response to her stroke was like, hey, did my diet cause this?
Well, of course. Second guessing herself. She's had a surprise. She's had a shock. Something has happened that she didn't expect. And she doesn't have the level of knowledge and training in this field that someone like, for example, myself does, to know absolutely that what she's been doing for the last 6 to 7 months on and off is not the cause of the problem.
super high fat one that I've been eating recently.
And I have to admit that when I first had the stroke, my first inclination was to jump to a low-fat diet as soon as I can, because that is what traditional cardiology would tell you.
So, traditional cardiology is wrong.
Is the best heart-healthy diet.
So that's an opinion.
That would have been a logical thing to do, but she seems confused as to why she even had the stroke at all, being so healthy.
And boy,
So?
I have been eating such high fat, like such high fat. But I'm
So?
saying that I've been on carnivore. I'm a pretty darn healthy person. I work out like 5 mornings a week. I'm pretty healthy, have a decent weight. I don't smoke. I don't drink. Haven't had a drink in 23 years. I don't do drugs. There should be no reason. If I have
Except that there's something that's been causing chronic systemic inflammation in your body for probably the last at least 5 decades, which has come to this head at this time. Without going back through your entire life history, it's going to be really hard to pinpoint exactly what has been causing that inflammation. But that's what you'd be looking for if you're looking for a cause, though.
cholesterol, I'm going back to the standard, whatever they tell me is a good diet.
Yes, her cholesterol.
She just said that if her cholesterol is high, she's going to go back to the standard diet. Well, that's just ignorant. I'm sorry. It's not a personal attack on this woman. She simply isn't educated enough to know that what she's just said is ignorant. But obviously it's her life. She can do what she likes.
Cholesterol is high, which we will get to in a second here. But
I can't wait, Michael, for you to get to cholesterol, because I've never dealt with you on cholesterol before, have I, son? If people want to look back through the back catalogues of videos I've made about Michael and his ridiculous statements, I think we've actually done with this. But clearly, since Michael wants to continue to say the same stupid thing week in and week out, despite the fact that he's been absolutely spanked on it I don't know how many times, we'll go through it again. Why not?
it's a reminder that just being leaner doesn't necessarily mean that you are healthy. And this brings me to
Agreed.
two other very relevant stories about other carnivore dieters. One you may have heard of, the carnivore.
This is some anecdotes and also a couple of segments cut directly from last week's video that was wrong and posted into this week's video, which is also wrong. Dealt with it last week, but we'll go through it again quickly here because you might not have seen last week's.
Poor kid, he has abs and he's, doing everything right, not smoking, but he's on a carnivore diet and finds out that.
For how long, Michael? How long has he been on a carnivore diet? And how do we know? Do we take his word for it?
That his widowmaker artery is 95% clogged.
Right, so that's a situation that takes decades to develop. How long has he been carnivore and how do we know? Because you're trying to make a case here against the carnivore diet, Michael, and it's not working. All you're doing is spewing mindless ideology and theology. And you're also posing as a scientist or someone who is remotely credible to discuss scientific literature. You're not. We'll get to that, though.
And so he quits that diet, which made sense. And then another one I covered recently was posted on Alzheimer's forum. This is another person who's physically active.
So...
doesn't smoke, all that stuff. And they're on the carnivore diet. They have their
For how long? And how do we know?
first heart attack. And then the next year they have a second heart attack. And then finally are like, yeah, I need to
Great story, Michael. More emphasis on the dragons next time. And after 8 seasons, please write a decent ending.
go off the carnivore diet as my doctor is telling me to. And that one is particularly compelling to me because
Compelling. Compel means to give you no other choice. There are many choices, Michael, on how to be, how to read literature, competently or otherwise. You're in the otherwise department, unfortunately. You could act ethically and morally towards your fellow man, person, attack helicopter, or not. You could be a theologian spouting errant nonsense on an unsuspecting and frankly low IQ audience. You could do that, Michael. Or you could front up to me for a scientific debate on pretty much any of the topics that you feel passionate about with regard to human health, because you're wrong on every single one of them, demonstrably, easily, without breaking a sweat. The challenge has been issued before. You refused because you thought that I'd have to abuse you. No. If we agree beforehand that I won't say naughty words during the debate, well, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
During the first heart attack, one of their other arteries, their right coronary artery, was only 10% clogged. And
yes, it develops exponentially. We understand this. What's next?
The next year, when they went in for their second heart attack, it was 99% clogged.
Yes, no surprises.
And that brings me to just a bird's eye view of Beth's timeline. I mean, 65 years.
Right. So nothing that happened in that 65 years played into her medical outcome at that time, 65 years later? How many thousand different degrees of freedom are there, Michael, that were completely uncontrolled in your so-called scientific proof that the carnivore diet is bad? Okay.
There's no stroke. So she does 3 months of keto and 6 months of carnivore. And
right, so the stroke happens at the end of the development of the disease process, which has been going on in this case for probably well over 5 decades. Yeah, so?
boom.
What she's been doing behaviourally in the last 6 to 7 months of that, probably fairly irrelevant, Michael. Still.
Stroke. And yes, we are talking about anecdotes here.
Exactly. Can we do some science at any point? I know you can't, Michael, despite your falsely held belief, your arrogance, frankly, to consider yourself remotely competent to talk about science. But we'll get to that.
We have a few of them, but you will see that they fit quite well into not just the scientific consensus on this topic.
Oh, consensus. Science, Michael, is not done by consensus. Science is done empirically. So you don't even understand that. You don't even know how science is done. Appeal to consensus fallacy is your first attempt to actually even start talking science here. And your segue away from your anecdotes.
But the highest quality data.
The highest quality data, there isn't any good quality data on health outcomes in human beings as that regards cause and effect with any aspect of lifestyles, Michael. Nutritional or otherwise.
We have on the topic. Well, all right, now what is the story of her bouncing back on the diet despite that concern? Well,
she probably checked it out and found out that her concern and her second guessing of herself was not indicated worthwhile or worth the energy that she spent on it, because the diet is still correct.
Starts with diet denial mechanism number.
Denial, there's this word that these idiots like to use, denial. It takes a position where we are to assume that your position is correct. Well, no, Michael, your position is not correct. Nobody's denying anything except your credibility to speak in this field.
One, which is, of course, LDL cholesterol being just...
Well, number one, still wrong. LDL is still not cholesterol, Michael. LDL is a lipoprotein carrier, not cholesterol.
Fine. And it all starts out with her getting a pamphlet in the hospital.
Says you need to control your cholesterol levels.
Well, false. No, you don't. Your genes do that. They've been doing that in one form or another for at least 4,500 million years. Probably longer than that. Okay, you don't need to do a damn thing.
And it says here, eat very little saturated fat.
Well, that's a bad idea. Ongoingly, because largely saturated animal fats are the exact source of fats that human beings have evolved on for at least 350,000 years, and probably more like 4.5 million in forms of speciation prior to humans that were very human-like but not yet quite human. It's a well-developed pathway trodden over many, many, many generations of both positive and negative selection pressures. It's absolutely where we are meant to get our energy from.
It says this type of fat can raise the low-density lipoprotein or LDL bad cholesterol.
Right, so that's just theology. There is no such thing as bad cholesterol, and LDL isn't it, if there were, because LDL is still not cholesterol. Okay?
In your blood.
Again, that's the scientific consensus, but
appeal to consensus fallacy. That's not an evidentiary statement, Michael. It does not support your argument and will not provide any leverage on your argument, except to someone with a very, very limited intelligence quotient. And I know that's who your audience are, Michael. I know that's who you're aiming your nonsense at. But nonetheless, we're here to correct it where it's wrong. And there it is, appeal to consensus fallacy. Can we have some evidence, please, Michael, that carnivore is bad somehow? Shall we wait for that? All right, steel yourselves. Here comes some more, Michael.
But then she gets her LDL tested, and boom, yes, it is high at
According to whom?
144.
And with respect to what?
Not quite as high as Jenny, the last carnivore dieter who I responded to, who was up around 173, but earlier the same month she was at like 150, so who knows what Beth's range is.
Exactly. There you go. Repeatability of measurement. Whoops. So to get an idea of someone's actual level, you need to take repeated measures over a number of days, don't you, Michael? Whoopsie.
And yes, we're talking about conventional LDL being optimally under 100. But
false. That is an opinion, Michael. It's a bought and paid for opinion. We'll get to that, I'm sure, because we have to every week with you in your videos. Can't wait for it. Put bets on it now. Will Michael mention the European consensus opinion, the European consensus panel on atherosclerosis opinion as being good and valid, despite the fact that he says opinions aren't valid, and this is one? And two, he also says in his other videos around the place that a reason to dismiss what somebody has to say is conflict of interest. As soon as you see a conflict of interest, you should ignore them. And yet their conflict of interest is quite staggering. I'm sure we'll get to it. Place your bets now.
That's more of like an achievable target for people in a Western...
It's not a target for people except people who are foolish enough to be taken in by this false theology. You do not need to control your cholesterol. Your genes are doing that already. Let them get on with it.
Culture when 50 to 70 would actually prevent more atherosclerosis.
No, prevent is a cause and effect statement. There is no evidence extant anywhere in the literature now, and neither will there be in the future, that can support that claim, Michael. It's an opinion.
As you can see by this study.
That study is not an experimental cause and effect study. It's an associative study. It is unable to inform on cause and effect, ergo it is unable to inform on risk. Given the population in this study, it is also unable to inform on a different population of people. This is a subpopulation of already aged individuals. In fact, as it is, this is a retrospective look at what happened in some people over a period of time. It cannot predict forward what will happen in any other group of people, actually. So, associative study. No, Michael, that's not proof of anything. What else have you got?
Chart the amount of atherosclerosis.
Right, this study has been floating around for some time. It's been debunked by a number of sensible commentators, including myself, a number of times over the years. And yet, water off a duck's back. Let's bring this thing out again. Rightio. Okay. Number one, this is associative. Healthy user bias is at play here. This is not a controlled experimental study. Number two, let's have a look at just the little thing underneath where it says 50 to 60 for LDL-C on the very left-hand side of this chart, at the very bottom left-hand of this figure here. N equals 2 in that group. In the next group, it was 9 individuals, and then 41 in the next group. So, 2. Right. So, an association which is weak at best, outcome measurements which are completely arbitrary and don't actually necessarily inform on the disease progression or seriousness at all, a pretty chart to divert your attention away from doing actual science and asking the actual questions that need to be asked. Let's say LDL is associated with heart disease, meaningfully. So, that doesn't make it the cause of it. Are we done? No? Still? Okay.
Sclerosis sites is clearly higher when you get above 70, and under 100 there can be very not good still. But she decides to ditch the conventional views of cardiology all over the world.
So appeal to a consensus fallacy again after having shown us yet another associative data set that does not inform on cause and effect in any way, and having given us your opinion again.
World, and instead
Remember where opinions go, Michael?
To just follow the advice of one niche cardiologist, Dr. Nadir Ali.
And Dr. Ali is a carnivore, so he is an extreme low-carb person. He's a carnivore just like I am. But Dr. Ali says LDL actually has some amazing benefits.
Oh, major facepalm. This is just...
So how's that a scientific response to what she is reporting that somebody else said? And LDL does have some pretty good benefits, Michael. Like the ability to live. What's next?
It's gone from just LDL denial to...
No, see, there you go with the denial thing. What do you mean LDL denial? No one's denying LDL, Michael. It exists. It's a lipoprotein carrier for lipids.
Straight up LDL fetishization.
Fetishization. It's clear that Michael is absolutely not going to be doing any science here today again, isn't it?
And Dr. Ali is a board-certified interventional cardiologist.
So?
Yeah, so he's essentially a body mechanic, with a high level of training on that. But how much dietary training did he actually get?
Well, Michael, how much have you ever had? And does that impact anything he has had to say for veracity and correctness? Or anything you have had to say for veracity and correctness? Are the facts still unchallenged? They still are, Michael, and you're still wrong.
Minimal, looking to a paper like this, quote, cardiologists typically receive minimal training in nutrition.
Yes, we know that.
And are not well equipped to deliver effective nutritional counseling.
The same is true of young men with an extreme arrogance and ego problem and a deeply held theological belief in the Church of Anorexia Vegana having anything to say online about nutrition, because you too, Michael, are not trained in this field.
That can, of course, make them susceptible to nutrition myths as well.
Well, Michael, first of all, you have to have the competence and innate ability to be able to tell what is good science and what is not, to determine what is a myth and what isn't. You, unfortunately, are destitute of such a capacity. You are incapable. You are not an authority able to make a judgment on this area. Sorry about that.
I could reduce their cholesterol with medicines, but I was always a cholesterol skeptic.
But what does he say about his patients and how he started this?
I am not able to help improve their lives. Their blood pressure got worse despite many blood pressure medicines. Their diabetes got worse. They became more obese.
That's because the traditional allopathic model is wrong at its very foundations and will not typically ameliorate the situation for any given person.
Summarize Ali's story. He says his patients were not getting better even if they were put on things like statins.
Well, that's not going to help.
Of course, they're eating a standard American diet and still having a horrible lifestyle, but he felt like he wasn't losing enough weight even though he's bike riding, so he went on a low-carb diet. Yeah, because everybody across the world, like those in Asia and all the blue zones who eat carbs, are all massively obese. No, I guess he was inspired to go low-carb because of Tour de France winner Chris Froome. Well, it turns out, he was never truly just this low-carb guy. He always carb-loaded before races, and he actually went vegan in 2019. So
who cares, Michael, about any of that last segment? None of that provides any additional information nor science on which to base our decision about what you're inferring we should do by the very title of your video, and that is we should assume that carnivore is bad somehow. I'm still waiting.
Studying the game changers. But what did Dr. Ali say to change her mind back to what she already wanted to believe? A very hard task.
Yes, Michael. It's hard to get through to people who are indoctrinated and absolutely brainwashed to a theological belief in something, isn't it? You're right.
He says he had all these great improvements with his patients, putting them on a low-carb diet, as a part of his cardiology practice.
So?
And then when I started trying that in people who were 70, 80, even 90-year-old, I saw that they lost about 30 to 50 pounds over a 6-month period. I saw that they reduced their diabetic medications or got off of them. I saw several of them get off their wheelchair, drop their walkers.
I think I need to present an alternative explanation here.
Why, Michael? Do you have anything upon which to base such an explanation?
Because clearly, he's into low carb, he has that bias. And so if he has somebody go on a low carb diet over the decades of all the people, he picks out the ones that have a positive result and
Are you suggesting that he might be cherry picking, Michael? Because that's never happened in science before, has it?
Yeah, somebody might lose some weight regardless of whatever therapies they're doing. And then he, puts that in the memory bank.
Okay, so speculation. Good. To go with your appeal to authority fallacy, your associative data set that proves nothing whatsoever, not even about what's associated with what, in fact, and your opinion. Still, and we are nearly halfway through your video, Michael. It's not looking good for you, is it?
It's a success, and then somebody's diabetes markers improve, even though mechanistically, in terms of more saturated fat, your insulin resistance is getting worse. But take away the carbs, you can improve.
Okay, so that was an opinion piece. Not a scientific piece of work, not an experiment. That didn't prove anything. That was somebody's opinion. Where do they go again, Michael?
Those numbers, that goes into the memory bank. What is not going into the memory bank because he doesn't have enough trends? The likely increased all-cause mortality that he is giving.
Likely is the same thing as saying risk. It's a cause and effect statement. That paper is unable to inform any given person on their likelihood of anything going forward. It is an associative, so-called prospective cohort study. It is relevant to that particular population or subpopulation. And it's valid if it reports what was observed without adjusting it, or controlling before collecting data for who is in the cohort and who isn't, so that they are reasonably homogeneous, for example. None of those things are done in any of these studies. They are pseudoscience. They are not controlled science. They do not prove cause and effect. They do not inform on risk or likelihood or hazard still.
His patients by putting them on a low carb diet. Why do I say that? Because meta-analysis after meta-analysis.
Of what? Meta-analysis of what, Michael? This one claims to be a meta-analysis of low carbohydrate diets. Did you actually look, Michael, at what a low carbohydrate diet is? No? I did. I suggest you do that, Michael. And then make another video pointing out your error and retracting your ridiculous nonsense. Because the studies that are spoken about here in this meta-analysis were not low-carbohydrate diets. Okay?
Show that low-carb diet.
And it's an associative study. It does not inform on cause and effect in any way, shape or form, ergo risk, hazard, or likelihood of anything going forward. It's a great story and needed more emphasis on the dragons, still.
Are associated with about 30% increased all-cause mortality.
I covered that last week on this study here as well, in terms of what the actual value of that was. That was 24 person deaths per 100,000 person years of follow-up, from the lowest to the highest incidence of mortality. And it's an associative study that's completely uncontrolled, ergo cannot inform on cause and effect. Still, what's next?
And then to a more recent study on the topic, even more relevant because it was into middle age, the one that led Dr. Mercola to quit his keto diet.
Again, this is an associative mishmash of uncontrolled pseudoscientific claptrap that cannot inform on cause and effect, risk or hazard or likelihood.
Showing that especially high animal fat, low carb diets were associated with increased all-cause mortality.
Not meaningfully. And again, was it unadjusted, Michael, or was it fabricated? I.e. adjusted. I think you'll find it was the latter. We're done with that. That's not science either. That's you being taken in by pseudoscience. This nutritional epidemiology is the kind of work that is indicated. Its role is to point a scientist to where they should go to do some actual science. It's hypothesis generating. The difficulty in human nutrition is we can't do the studies. That doesn't mean we take this hypothesis generating nonsense as proof of cause and effect, because it isn't, still.
Well, those healthy higher carb diets, which had more plants in them, were associated with lower mortality.
Not meaningfully, and so what? Healthy user bias, we are done. Not a cause and effect study. Confounded.
Their good cholesterol went
There
up.
is no such thing as good cholesterol. There is just cholesterol. In the same way there is no such thing as bad cholesterol, there isn't good either.
But
It has a role, it's vital to your life. Let's stop this nonsense with good and bad cholesterol. This is a construct. It does not exist.
LDL came up.
And he says, yeah, my low-carb patients, LDL does go up, but, that's totally okay. And
It absolutely is, of course.
before he goes off on why high LDL is good, I just have to remind people that if you're going to be paying attention to somebody because they're a cardiologist, you can't ignore things like the European Society of Cardiology.
Bingo! There it is. Why can't we ignore them, Michael? Because you seem to be ignoring things by people on the basis of conflict of interest, and have said so in your videos, and yet you ignore these people's conflict of interest. Shall we have a look at it again? Yes, absolutely. Of course, these people are absolutely unconfounded by conflict of interest, aren't they, Michael? You absolute clown. Seriously? And consensus, guidelines, opinion, Michael. Where do opinions go again? Especially bought and paid for ones? Oh, yes, they can be ignored and should be.
His consensus statement saying that high LDL is causally linked to atherosclerosis.
That's an opinion. That's their opinion statement, and it's false. It's not actually supported by data at all. Have you read the thing? I have, carefully, because I'm an actual cardiovascular pathophysiologist, Michael, and you are not. Just saying something is so doesn't make it so. I'm the Queen of Sheba because I said so, Michael. No? Okay, what's next?
And also all of the studies like the Mendelian randomization.
Right, so what we have here is an associative data set claiming to indicate causality, which it cannot do. There are 1, 2, 3 different data sets plotted on the same chart here. Every one of them is an associative data set. Something is associated with something else, and control has not been exerted. So it cannot inform on cause and effect. This is an opinion. This, by the way, comes from the same people who weren't at all biased by any money whatsoever from statin-producing companies. Good, Michael. Absolutely top-shelf stuff. Can we move on?
Are looking at gene variations in LDL, which lead to higher or lower levels.
No, not lead to. No. So you don't even understand the process between having a particular gene and the expression of a particular protein at the end of many, many steps here, all of which can be affected. My word. The ignorance just drips from every pore. At least every pore that isn't already clogged completely with Dunning-Kruger.
And these are really the highest quality of evidence that we can get in situations where we can't have a randomized controlled trial. Okay.
So the best evidence we can get is very, very poor by way of even associative value for correctness and veracity, because there is this idea that adjusting what we observed and reporting something different from what we observed is somehow science, which it isn't, by the way, Michael. The best quality evidence we have is no evidence for causality. Your claim, Michael, is causal. You're supporting these people who have said causal without any evidence to support their claim. That's not how science is done. Sorry.
Okay, now I'll let him spew a bunch of nonsense about how high LDL is good. Here he is.
To neutralize.
So again, nonsense is an opinion, Michael. It's your opinion, and your opinion is worth nothing in this field. You are not a trained cardiologist. He is. So at least in terms of specialization, knowledge, etc., and authority in this field, he's a lot closer to where I am than you are, son. He's in the middle of you and me. You are at the far end. You know nothing about this at all and should not be commenting on it. How can you not see that? You have a master's degree in public health, statistics, and you still can't understand that that's not science. Wow.
Bacteria and viruses, you need the LDL. So it's something that is fighting infections.
Oh, LDL is great for viruses? Yeah, maybe it plays a role in our immune system, but looking to the BMJ 6-country study, it appears that people on a low-carb diet had about 4...
How was that defined, Michael? What's a low-carb diet? And so what? This is an associative study, healthy user bias. We're done. This is not a controlled scientific piece of evidence of any kind. This is a waste of our time. Again,
times the risk of moderate to...
No, not risk. These studies cannot inform on risk, hazard, likelihood, or anything else. They report on, well, fantasy, because they adjust what they actually saw before they report what they didn't see. This is a joke, Michael, and so are you.
Severe cases, which is horrible. Well, loosely plant-based people had 73%.
Loosely plant-based. What is that, Michael? And who defines what's loosely plant-based? You're looking very, very well, by the way, son. Very well indeed.
And lower than your standard diet. Yeah, I don't think LDL particles are white blood cells, bro.
No.
Yeah, because the only thing that the immune system has is white blood cells. That's the only component of it, bro. And not only are you now suggesting you know more about cardiovascular pathophysiology than a medically qualified, at least, practitioner in this field, you're now claiming that you know more about how the human body works than this individual does, which you don't, Michael. Wow.
Number 2, it dampens inflammation.
LDL dampens inflammation. I think you mean from studies like this that it leads to inflammation, especially.
This is an opinion piece, Michael. This is not an experimental piece of work. This is someone's opinion. Where do opinions sit once again? Oh, yeah.
When it's oxidized, which will just happen naturally through aging, especially when it's high. And most ironically from this paper, infections induce LDL oxidation itself.
This is great. This is great as evidence of something. If you happen to be a hamster.
Hello there. My name's Harry the hamster. I'm about 8 centimeters tall, a little bit chubby, and a little bit hairy.
Because that's what this study's about, Michael. This study's about what happened in hamsters, okay? Should we move on?
And I can tell another easy example that people can relate to. If you take 100 diabetics age 50 years of age, and you weight match them with another 50 people who are not diabetic.
Why would you weight match them? That's not enough to have a cohort control. No, there are many factors, have you noticed, other than someone's weight.
And the non-diabetic people will have a higher LDL.
And as for the LDL being lower on diabetes claim he just pulled out of his fiberless butt to the American Heart Association.
Again, now you're going to appeal to authority again and give us their opinion. Okay, let's have an opinion. Again, I'm just remembering where opinions go, Michael.
Diabetes tends to increase bad cholesterol.
Again, doesn't exist. So this statement here is a complete waste of our time, isn't it? Why would we take anything from a self-claimed authority who can't even adequately describe the reality of the situation? They're talking about bad cholesterol, which still does not exist. We're done with the American Heart Association. Finish. Nothing they have to say is of any value to us henceforth, Michael. Appeal to authority fallacy.
Levels, which increases the risk of heart disease.
No. There are no studies informing on risk anywhere in the literature, Michael. Not one anywhere.
Disease and stroke. No stroke of genius here, but he continues with 2 obscure but convincing to a lot of people studies out of Europe on LDL and mortality.
So when you go into the demographic data and you take 50,000 patients in Europe, followed in the Hunt trial,
So there's no value in talking about this epidemiology as indicative of anybody's likelihood, risk, or hazard of anything going forward. This is nonsense. Both ways. We can ignore this.
Actually a trend towards lower mortality.
So what?
Higher the cholesterol.
So what? Is that a cause and effect statement? No. Still.
And Beth was really convinced. You can just see the sparkle in her eyes with the LDL claims.
And Dr. Ali would say that, for instance, in my case, higher LDL is actually good and means I would live longer.
Well, who cares what Dr. Ali would say? That's his opinion. goodness sake.
Then he goes into talking about the Leiden trial.
There is a town of Leiden in Netherlands. In that town, they took people between 85 and 95 years of age.
And they locked them in labs and controlled every aspect of their lives except for the thing that you want to talk about next, so that we absolutely have a gauge on cause and effect, didn't they? No? God's sake.
The people with the lowest cholesterol had higher mortality,
So?
higher cancer risks,
No.
higher infection.
So?
Yep, high LDL equals longevity. But is this really true? First of all, we're looking at 2 European studies here, one of which had just a few variation in the points in terms of mortality risk, and another was just...
Well, it can't inform on risk at all. There are no studies that can inform on risk, Michael, still.
2,000 people. So we need to ask what's going on here. First, it's important to note that, yeah, people with lower LDL tend to have higher mortality.
So?
From various studies, however, there is a major reverse causation issue here.
Oh, right. So if something proves absolutely that your theologically held belief structure is false, the only thing you can now do is claim this magical reverse causation. It's absolutely ludicrous. It's embarrassing that you would even suggest this, Michael. Number one, the studies that you're talking about can't inform on causality either way. So your reverse causality is just as ludicrous as your causality cause. It's laughable. Oh, high LDL leads to disease, except that when we look at LDL in people with disease, that's not so. Ergo, disease makes your LDL drop. Oh, okay. Goodness gracious. No, Michael, what's next?
Here that, the newer studies mention, especially in a Western dietary context where you're eating enough animal fat where everybody should have higher LDL, when they're still eating that way and their LDL is crashing, it means that something is very wrong and they might just be on the edge of death. From the study on the topic, quote,
association of, okay, great. Well, association cannot inform on causality. Shall we move on?
interestingly, the increased risk of death among those with low
No, not risk. There are no studies that can inform on risk. That is a completely unacceptable statement. No, Michael, no.
cholesterol was due to non-vascular disease such as liver disease or cancer.
Risk, no. That whole statement there is worthless. It talks about a metric that cannot be informed upon by the extant data anywhere in the literature.
They concluded that spontaneous decline in cholesterol levels may be a marker for...
That's the great thing about the word maybe. It leaves the other thing entirely on the table. Maybe not too. That's why it can get into these peer-reviewed, published statements, because it's not false, because it's talking about a possibility, someone's opinion or hypothesis, Michael. Just remind us once again where opinions go.
Worsening health conditions. Yes, this is reverse causation. If you're already dying from something like liver failure or cancer, or you just can't eat because of that, your LDL might crash.
It might, yes. Absolutely. Yes, that's possible. So what?
And this creates a really strong data point that is completely irrelevant to the average person's LDL driving cardiovascular disease.
Well, hang on a minute. Because you didn't seem too concerned about repeatability of measurement previously, Michael. So now that it suits your argument, you want to talk about repeatability of measurement, okay? And you want to talk about a factor which is associated with another factor, but for which there is no evidence of causality. Thus, you're wasting our time anyway.
And this is where, again, those Mendelian studies are really important.
No, they're not, Michael. Only to people whose IQs are low enough to be impressed by such things and think that it's such great science because there are so many words in there bigger than wheelbarrow. Mendelian studies are just another form of associative work, Michael, that's all. Association cannot inform on causality. For goodness sake, this isn't hard to understand, even if you are a hamster.
And I'm looking for a female so I can shove my fucking cock in her mouth and up her shit and then rub my balls all over her.
Again, relying on genes, and those Mendelian studies like this one show that, in particular, higher LDL gene score was associated with 13% increased mortality. And
so, that's one gene. How many genes exist in a human body, Michael? Where are the confounds? Everywhere. Where are the controls? Nowhere.
The genes probably have less of a difference than the carnivore diet does, and that's including into...
So, an opinion. Again, okay?
older age, which is really a direct response to that small Leiden trial in older people. And because Mendelian randomization isolates genes, it is a pretty valid method for determining causation.
No, it isn't. No, it's an association of one factor with another factor. Again, you seem to have missed every step between possessing a certain gene or gene variant and the production of a protein at the end of a many chain of events, all of which can be affected. Still, the possession of a gene cannot inform on causality. And Mendelian studies don't even usually look at a single gene. They look at bins of people with all sorts of different SNPs piled together as if they are now somehow homogeneous in every other way, which they're not. It's ridiculous, Michael. And you're an absolute buffoon to suggest what's being suggested here as being a valid statement made by someone. It's not. Not everyone that's got professor in front of their name knows what they're talking about, Michael. Sorry about that.
Published in the journal Stroke. This one says they use Mendelian randomization to impute direct causal relationship.
No, they didn't. They're just words. That's an impossibility. It cannot be done because there is a lack of experimental control. There are confounds, covariates, collinearities. We are done with this. No. False statement. Inappropriate. Unscientific.
Showing that a standard deviation of genetically elevated LDL was associated with an increased risk.
So, associated doesn't inform on causality. Risk is a cause and effect statement, which is being inferred from the statement beforehand. It's not a statement on risk because these studies still cannot inform on risk. No. Not acceptable.
Of ischemic stroke. We have to just look at meat and stroke. She's on the carnivore diet. Why are we...
For the last 6 to 7 months on and off, remember?
Not talking about meat consumption here. Well,
because 6 to 7 months of doing anything isn't necessarily likely to lead to a disease process which we all know develops over decades, Michael. Still, circling back to the very beginning point.
Looking to this meta-analysis from the Journal of...
Okay, so risk. No, this study can't inform on risk. It's nonsense. This is an epidemiological, associative mishmash study without control. This relies on self-report, for goodness sake. This isn't science. Sorry, Michael, we're done with this. What's next?
Stroke and cerebrovascular disease. It found that the higher intake of unprocessed red meat as well as processed meat were similarly associated with increased stroke risk.
So, healthy user bias, we're done. It's not cause and effect. And a 17% change on a baseline that's probably less than 8 per 10,000 in the first instance is of about 2/3 of 5/8 of 7/9 of fuck all use to anyone, Michael. Okay? This is ridiculous. And you're a joke, still.
Risk meaning more meat, more stroke.
No, that's a cause and effect statement, Michael. This is a retrospective look at what happened in some people in a thing called a prospective study. Those people, and only those people. Okay?
Is processed or not. Why not do another one? This meta-analysis in the American Heart Association Stroke Journal
is also completely unable to speak to cause and effect. And yet it still tries to, because that's what these clowns do, to try and make themselves seem worthwhile in the fraternity of so-called scientists. Sorry, boys and girls. Attack helicopters however you might identify, you're not. You're wasting our time. You are hypothesis generators. Go do that and be happy about it, and understand that none of your hypotheses will ever be tested scientifically, because we can't do those kind of studies on human beings. Still, risk, no. See, there's the word again, risk, no. The study cannot inform on risk. False.
More meat, more stroke again.
And there are see how there are no numbers there at all on that page? Not a single data point is presented to us there on which we could gauge the veracity of the statement. It's an opinion. And it's false.
And how about this meta-analysis in Nature's European Journal of Clinical
Risk? No, we're done. This cannot inform on risk. Still. And are you going to give us the stats?
Nutrition again, more meat, more stroke.
No, again, someone's opinion, i.e. the conclusion statement out of the paper, without actually dealing with the statistics at all even, let alone in any depth. Not even at all, Michael. Okay. No. Not acceptable.
Stroke, 3 meta-analyses showing more meat, more stroke.
No, they don't show that. No, Michael. Not at all. So you've completely misinterpreted all three of those studies. Not one of them shows any such relationship.
And in particular, whether it's processed or not, it was associated with increased ischemic stroke.
So associations are only of any interest if they are used to inform hypotheses which can be tested. Is that what's happening here? No. Ergo, the association is of no interest, unless it's massive, which it isn't.
Which is what she had and what is responsible for 90% of the strokes.
No, that's a cause and effect statement, Michael. It's also an opinion, and it's not underpinned by science at all. Sorry about that.
And now I want to just go into a couple more mechanisms in addition to...
mechanisms, boys and girls. Good, can't wait.
High LDL cholesterol, because
LDL is still not cholesterol, Michael. No.
Because cholesterol views are just not enough. I mean, you got to look at everything here. And the first one is heme iron from this study that looked at all cardiovascular disease, including stroke. Each 1 milligram a day of heme iron was associated with 7% increased risk.
No, it wasn't. Because this study is not about risk. This is an associative study. There might be all sorts of things underpinning that. What I will tell you is common sense tells us this. Of the two forms of iron, in terms of availability to a human body, the bioavailable form and the unbioavailable form, it's obvious to me that we do need a certain intake of iron throughout our lives, and we do need that in the form that our body is designed to absorb it in, the non-toxic form, the heme iron form, the very form that we've been gaining the vast majority of our iron from as a species for at least 350,000 years. But you want to tell me about a 7% difference between one group and another that you've arbitrarily put in place, and it's probably adjusted from reality anyway, so it's probably completely invalid. But 7% on, let's say, 8 per 10,000 person years of follow-up baseline, very, very, very small change in terms of deaths per person per year of follow-up. Past the stake. This is of no value. This is of no utility. Even if it was a cause and effect relationship, which it is not, the magnitude of the difference between the top and bottom, even if it was accurate and a truthful representation of what was observed in the universe, which it isn't, it's of no value. It's so small.
Of cardiovascular disease. How much heme iron does a carnivore dieter get? Well, you'll hear that they're generally eating around 2 pounds of steak per day, and that's only 1,400 calories, which is ridiculous.
That's a bit too much steak for most people, to be honest, but that's covered on my channel in depth.
Don't know how they do it. And at about 70% of total iron coming from heme iron in beef, we can see that our total is about 20 milligrams of heme iron per day.
So what?
Even though the study didn't go that high, theoretically, we're looking at about a 240% relative.
No. Based on this study, that's completely worthless and unable to inform on any cause and effect, ergo unable to predict anything. It's a report on what might have happened in some universe, but it didn't happen in this one because it's adjusted anyway, remember? No, Michael.
Relative risk.
Absolutely. The form in which we've been taking our iron in for 350,000 years and probably 4.5 million, Michael, it's going to kill us. Of course it is. You buffoon. This is ridiculous.
Of cardiovascular disease based off the amount of heme iron that they're eating. And by the way, they found no association for non-heme or plant-based iron and cardiovascular disease.
It's of no value to us. It's probably not going to have much effect on the body except a toxic one because non-heme iron is toxic. Okay.
And from this paper, heme iron also oxidizes LDL, which is especially a concern when you don't...
In a test tube, of course it does, yeah. Under circumstances where it's encouraged to do so. Sure. It's reductionism there though, Michael, isn't it? That's not science. That's misrepresentation of science. That's cherry-picking a small piece of small-scale work done in vivo.
Have chlorophyll to buffer that oxidization.
in vitro.
Maybe it is the trimethylamine N oxide, or TMAO, which forms in our gut from the carnitine in meat as well as the choline in eggs.
Yeah, except it doesn't hang around in a carnivore that is well adapted to the carnivore diet and who has developed a microbiome commensurate with that carnivore diet, because they tend to cultivate a phyla of bacteria that break down TMAO, thus removing it from the system, Michael, altogether. Whoops. So you're talking about a theoretical, hypothetical problem here.
And can lead to oxidization that does damage. This study found that stroke victims had higher TMAO blood levels.
So?
And that high blood TMAO meant nearly twice the ischemic stroke risk.
No, not risk. No, still, this is an associative study. This is associated with that. So?
And at this point, I need to mention an alternative that she could try, which is Esselstyn's whole food plant-based.
Why on earth would you do that? Ignore your entire genetic history and past back to deep time, back to the very first development of our species, Michael. Why would you ignore all of that and do something completely at odds with that? How can that possibly be a good idea?
Diet. He did a study on people with cardiovascular disease.
A naturalistic observation without control and with confounds, covariates, and collinearities rife in it. Not a piece of scientific research. This is a vox pop piece, Michael. It's an opinion.
A lot of them previously had things like stroke. There were nearly 200 of them. And after 12...
And this figure didn't even come from the study that Michael is talking about. It came from a completely different study, by the way, that Esselstyn took from another study and put in here. And it shows precisely nothing. These are some images of poor quality at best. They're a big so what.
12 years, the 177 of them that stayed on the diet, only 0.6% of them had adverse events like heart attack and stroke.
Right, so how is that two evenly controlled cohorts? It's not. And N is really small. The alleviation a bit of Randall cycle issues on a vegan diet in the short term before that vegan diet destroys that person's health due to catastrophic nutrient deficiencies. That could partially be part of it. This is, as I say, this is not an experiment. This is not a piece of scientific endeavor. This is a great story with not enough emphasis on the dragons. And the ending hasn't been written. And maybe the guy that wrote the beginning isn't going to write the ending for us. And whoops, is that going to be obvious?
But of the people that failed the diet, 60% of them had adverse events like heart attack and stroke. And
so that's what happened with those roughly 200 people at that time, under those circumstances, with their genes, in the situation that those genes were placed by those people at that time. This doesn't project forward anything, or to any other group, and it's a small-scale thing anyway. Still not science, Michael.
Stints, etc. And those are super impressive results, but I need to get to her, diet denial reason number 2.
Again, with the denial thing, you want to point the finger of blame for this woman's stroke on her diet, the one that she's been on for the last 6 to 7 months on and off, Michael. Nothing you have said leads anyone with more than 3 working brain cells to believe that you've actually supported that claim in any way, shape or form, or that you are a competent analyst or commentator upon science, because you're not. Still.
2, which is the airplane she went on actually caused the stroke.
Is that I have a tiny birth defect in my heart, which is a little tiny hole in my heart. And what the doctors think happened is, a week before I had my stroke, I was taking a long plane trip. It was like 6 hours, and I didn't have compression stockings on. So basically, he thought a blood clot formed in my leg. In my case, the clot, they believe, went through that hole in my heart, went right to my brain, and caused the stroke.
Yes, at that point, the doctor...
Okay, so complete speculation. Rightio, good.
Actually ripped away her brochure telling her to eat less saturated fat and said...
That's not going to help. Saturated fat consumption will not affect the likelihood of thrombotic strokes, Michael.
You know what? Just eat as much meat and as much animal fat as you want. You'll be just fine.
They didn't say that, Michael. You said that for comedy purposes. It's a straw man. It's ridiculous. It just points to the fact that you've been completely unable to provide us with any science whatsoever.
Nope, I don't think he said that. Well, it's impossible for us to know exactly what happened. We can just look at some rough statistics here to figure out what was more likely, her having a stroke from the airplane or that her diet that was super high in saturated.
So speculation again. Completely valueless.
Fat and her high LDL actually caused her to have a stroke. This,
Well, you don't know, Michael. You really don't know because you have no training in this area whatsoever.
study tracked 130 million airline passengers.
So what?
And saw their incidence of stroke over 2 weeks after their flight.
So what?
They conclude that stroke related to air travel is a...
How does this inform on what did or did not happen with this particular woman? It doesn't. It has no impact on that whatsoever. What's next?
Rare occurrence, less than 1 in a million.
So?
To be fair to her, they did mention that the whole heart thing was important, but not the only mechanism of flight-related stroke. And this whole is pretty common at about 25 to 30% of the population. 20% of the people in the study had it, which is even lower than average. And with all of those people flying, we still have that really low rate of airplane-related stroke. But
so
perhaps the main point here is that she had a clot in her leg, which could have...
We don't know that, Michael. It was speculation, remember?
Have been caused by her diet. And oxidative
and maybe not too, still.
stress plays a big role in venous clots or thrombosis.
Yes, but so what? Can you sensibly comment on the reactive oxygen species present in this woman, this particular woman, over the last 50 years, Michael, with any confidence whatsoever? No, you can't.
So, frankly, this could be a result of really an antioxidant deficiency from eating...
Maybe not too. That's the good thing about the word could.
...zero plants. Thrombosis Australia recommends eating less saturated...
Appeal to authority fallacy. Who cares what they recommend, Michael? It's an opinion. Remember where they go?
...saturated fat as well as plants for venous thrombosis, since they have anticoagulation factors, and people on plant-based diets have better coagulation markers.
So, healthy user bias, we're done.
What's more likely to cause her stroke? A 1 in a million plain chance, or just the scientific consensus that...
Appeal to consensus authority fallacy, but no evidence.
That high LDL from high animal fat consumption leads to atherosclerosis and various cardiovascular
That's an opinion though, isn't it, Michael? And it's false. So no.
issues. And I have to mention someone else that she's getting her information from. You may find him familiar with nearly 3 million subscribers now.
If you would like to know more specific information from like Dr. Ken Berry, who is a huge expert in the carnivore diet and its effects on our health, let me know because I would love to send him my medical record from that hospital stay and get his thoughts.
Yep, she's listening to Crazy Ken Berry and she wants...
Crazy Ken Berry says... Mike, the vegan who really has no advanced research degree of any kind, let alone one in physiological function, who has no peer-reviewed publications whatsoever of any kind, has no profession of any kind, like physician or academic or whatever, a grifter, a drifter, a waster, literally, it seems, a bloke with a strongly held opinion based entirely in arrogance and ignorance. A young man with a complete inability to actually engage with what science even is, let alone how it's done and what it establishes or doesn't establish by virtue of different aspects of the literature, like the review articles, opinion pieces, the editorials, opinion pieces, the authority position statements, opinions. Evidence is empirical and it's in the form of experimental works under control, using scientific discipline, using the scientific method, Michael. You've provided none of it because it does not exist. Still, and you've made yourself a laughingstock once again by promoting the ideas, the bought and paid for ideas of a group of criminally compromised individuals calling themselves the European Consensus Panel on Atherosclerosis, Arteriosclerosis, whatever. No, Michael. Try again, or don't try again. More to the point. It's time for you to shut down this ridiculous nonsense.
Asked him to come on the show to tell her why her stroke was not caused by her carnivore diet. I didn't have time to go in it in my Jenny video with her carnivore diet blood work, but she also follows Dr. Ken Berry, and Ken Berry is the one who pushes the BBBE diet, or the beef, bacon, butter, and eggs diet, which is clinically insane. He's telling people like...
No, it isn't, Michael. That's your opinion. Remember opinions and where they go?
To make their diet largely out of a class 1A carcinogen that
is an opinion, Michael. It's a false opinion. It's a misdirect. It's a misrepresentation of the facts.
Loaded with sodium, which of course drives stroke risk.
No, it doesn't, Michael. False again. Another opinion.
He's also deathly afraid of vegetables. And
no, he isn't, Michael.
I have an entire video responding to that, but...
Yeah, but ignorantly, arrogantly, without any basis or authority or credibility upon which to base your statements, Michael.
Yeah, if he was any more of a quack, he'd be...
That's your opinion, Michael, and it's worth nothing to anybody with more than 3 brain cells.
Yeah, duck. Okay, this guy is ridiculous. Let's just...
That's your opinion, Michael, and it's worth nothing.
Move on. And now I just want to touch on what I think is perhaps the most important thing to mention here, and that's that the carnivore diet and the experts in and around it have established a very dangerous ideology.
Oh, have we, Michael? Really? And that's not actually what's really happening in the vegan community, in fact, and has been for a very long time. Projection, much. A dangerous ideology. Let's hear it.
And sort of vacuum that sucks vulnerable people in.
Oh, right. So, again, with the projection?
To think that what they're saying is scientifically accurate.
Well, it is, Michael. At least what I'm saying is scientifically accurate. It's unassailable, in fact. Unlike everything you've said in your video. How you are unable to see how soundly you are getting smacked around pillar to post here, I will go to my grave not understanding how you don't see that. You're being absolutely eviscerated here by a competent scientist. But because that's not in line with your ideology, you can't even hear it or see it. It's amazing, isn't it, kids?
It goes exactly against the consensus.
Again, consensus, authority, fallacy, but no evidence still.
Is somehow romanticized as well as against all of the highest quality data we have.
Which is poor. The highest quality we have is extremely poor, Michael. Give us the full picture.
Yet when lower quality studies are cited, that's like awesome research. No,
again, that's just you editorializing now and giving us a story about some dragons or something in a chair. Seriously, son, work on the ending.
The case of Jenny, her husband really wanted her to go on a carnivore diet, so she searched up...
We covered that last week, remember, Michael? We've moved on to this week, some of us.
Carnivore information and was told how great it was. And then in the case of Beth here, she was already on the carnivore diet, so she's just looking to carnivore experts to tell her that everything is going to be okay.
Unlike what vegans do to find out whether they're going to be okay on a vegan diet. God, if any of them had more than 3 brain cells, I could have a look and see what happens to vegans over 5 to 10 years.
And Dr. Ali is a carnivore, so he is an extreme low-carb person. He's a carnivore just like I am. And
I'll be completely fair and say that, yes, veganism also is an ideology in that case to minimize harm to animals.
And yet that's a stupid thing to say, Michael, because demonstrably, absolutely, unequivocally, there's that word again, unequivocally, cause and effect, veganism kills more animals by orders of magnitude than does a carnivore diet. Fact. End of discussion on that one too.
Much as is possible, but the vegans are lucky in that their LDL average is ideal. And
no, it isn't. That's an opinion, Michael. It's not underpinned by science.
Their health outcomes are amazing in terms of diabetes and like that the Esselstyn study and on.
The Esselstyn study is not proof of anything. It's junk. It's one of those very, very low quality studies, Michael. The very thing you've been disparaging not 30 seconds ago in your own video. The fact that you can't see that because your ideology demands that because it's by Esselstyn, it must be good, that's where you're failing as son. You're showing your incompetence. This is junk. Absolute junk.
On and on. That just happens to be almost lucky in that sense, that this ideology equals healthier outcomes.
Well, it does. Anecdotally, people that go on a carnivore diet universally almost report brilliant things occurring for them. Unbelievable things. Improvements you wouldn't dream of, Michael.
However, the carnivore diet does not appear to show that. No, these studies on low-carb diets increasing more.
There aren't many studies on actual low-carb studies, Michael. They're all studies that claim to be about low-carb diets, but then you look at what the carb intakes were in the studies they're talking about, and you'll find they weren't low-carb. We're done.
Mortality. There is nothing meaningfully different about one high-meat, low-carb diet known as the carnivore diet and these other low-carb diets that people have been doing. It's still going to have that same result.
Again, you're projecting results forward into the future, Michael. Do you have a crystal ball? Because your projection of future outcomes is based on your fundamentally flawed, false, completely erroneous view of the universe and how it works. Ergo, so is your projection going to be wrong and erroneous. Think of that. No, of course you didn't.
In the end, I think you really get the point. You know, we have some weird niche.
Yeah, we get the point, Michael. You have no evidence to support your claim that the carnivore diet is bad. You've produced exactly that amount because there isn't any that exists, and you've made yourself the laughingstock again by showing how vastly, hugely incompetent you are to deal with science or talk about science. You've also, once again, been as arrogant and offensive as it's possible to be in a video. Wow.
Studies on LDL that maybe convinced her that it's okay, but the highest quality ones,
there aren't any good quality studies, even on association, let alone cause and effect, Michael. Still, the facts remain unchanged on this.
Mendelian ones are showing higher LDL is associated with higher stroke.
No, they're not showing that at all, in fact.
Associated with higher mortality.
Association, so what?
And just this scientific consensus is
again, consensus authority fallacy again, because you have no actual evidence, yeah.
That high LDL is causal to atherosclerosis.
No, it isn't still. That's still an opinion, and it's still false. It still isn't underpinned by science.
All the things that she was convinced that are okay about a carnivore diet are actually not.
No, that's false, Michael. That's your opinion, and it is not underpinned by science. We've covered that today in great depth. It's been great fun, hasn't it?
Meat meta-analysis after meta-analysis after meta-analysis
of associations, and not even reporting what was associated with what. In fact, adjusting it first and reporting something made up instead. Good, that's science. Lovely.
Show that higher meat consumption, even unprocessed red meat, is associated with increased ischemic stroke.
No, not really. And in fact, so what? It's an association.
So I know that somebody like Beth doesn't want to listen to somebody with vegan in their handle. I just hope that there's enough people watching this. Maybe they have a family member that is trying to go carnivore or something. They can at least directly hand them the highest quality studies.
There aren't any studies of high quality on cause and effect, an association between hard health outcomes in human beings and any aspect of diet whatsoever anywhere in the literature, Michael. They simply do not exist still.
And maybe that'll help even just one person. Who knows?
Nothing you have to say, Michael, will help anybody on any front. You are an ignoramus of the highest order. Your operational logic is childlike at best. Your grasp of science is absent entirely. You are nothing but a theologue, an ideologue, and an incompetent buffoon. It is time for you to stop making these videos, Michael. Or it is time for you to front me to defend your ridiculous arguments. I know you're not going to do that, and the reason is because you know you can't. The rest of you, I've had enough. He's just summing up. Join me next time when someone will be wrong on interwebs, and it'll probably be Michael again next week. Whatever. See you then. Ciao.